The boardroom stretched 40 feet of polished mahogany windows framing Manhattan's skyline like a museum exhibit of power. 12 faces around the table, each one carved from privilege and quarterly earnings. Rachel Carter stood at the head, spine straight, hands folded, the posture she'd perfected over 2 decades of refusing to bend. Margaret Whitmore's voice cut through the silence, sharp as the diamonds at her throat. Miss Carter, the board requires your resignation. Your decisions over the past 3 months have destroyed shareholder value by 18%. We cannot allow sentiment to continue eroding this company's foundation. Rachel's gaze moved across each face. Men in their 60s who'd inherited their seats. Women like Whitmore who'd clawed their way up by sacrificing everything soft. Every one of them expecting her to fight, to negotiate, to do what she'd always done, win. I haven't destroyed anything. I'm repairing what we broke. Whitmore's laugh held no humor. Repairing? You've divested $8.3 million from our highest performing portfolio. You have publicly admitted complicity in practices that are about to trigger federal investigations. I've told the truth. The words landed like a grenade on the mahogany. Rachel's voice remained level, that measured calm she'd learned from her father, though he'd used it in coal mines, not boardrooms. The vote is scheduled for tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. I suggest you prepare your statement. Rachel nodded once. She gathered nothing from the table, no files, no laptop, no corporate armor. Just turned toward the door, heels silent on carpet that cost more than most families earned in a year. Behind her, Whitmore's voice followed. You had everything, Rachel. Why would you throw it away? Rachel paused, hand on the brass handle, and for the first time in that room, she smiled. Because I finally learned the difference between having everything and having what matters. The door closed. The text appeared across the screen. 3 months earlier, December 31st. The penthouse windows reflected fireworks that hadn't started yet, the city holding its breath before midnight. Rachel stood in her living room, glass of wine, untouched on the counter, watching couples stream toward Times Square, 40 stories below. The space around her cost $4.2 million, floor-to-ceiling glass minimalist furniture in shades of winter art on the walls that investment advisors had called appreciating assets. Not a single photograph of a human face. Her phone buzzed. Mom, the screen read. Rachel let it ring through to voicemail, already knowing what her mother would say. The same thing she'd said every holiday for 20 years. Rachel, dear, still alone, I see. That's the price, isn't it? Your father always said, well, we made our choices. Happy New Year. The voicemail notification blinked. Rachel didn't listen. Instead, she walked to the bookshelf where a single framed photo hid behind a first edition Hemingway. She pulled it out, dust catching the light. West Virginia, 1994. A girl of 12 in a Goodwill dress standing outside a single-wide trailer. Behind her, a man in a miner's jacket, face already lined at 35, arm around his daughter's shoulders. The girl's eyes held something fierce, not hope, but determination so raw it looked like anger. Rachel remembered that day. Remembered her father coming home from the mine with a pink slip sitting at their kitchen table, with bills spread like a poker hand he couldn't win. Remembered the landlord's knock, her mother's tears, the way privilege had walked past their door without seeing them at all. I'll never be that powerless again. She'd whispered it then, 12 years old, while her father sold his truck to make rent. She'd built an empire on that whisper. Carter Industries, from an $800 laptop and student loans to a global tech conglomerate worth $2.1 billion. Forbes cover, Fortune's Most Powerful Women, Time's Game Changers. And tonight, New Year's Eve, she stood in a penthouse that could house 12 families with no one to count down to midnight. Her phone buzzed again. Not her mother this time, Elena, her assistant. Miss Carter, there's an issue with the La Maison Elise reservation. The manager said there's been a complication. Rachel's jaw tightened. She'd made that reservation 3 months ago, the one night a year she allowed herself to sit in public and pretend to be human. What kind of complication? He didn't specify, just asked if you could call him directly. Rachel checked her Patek Philippe 645. She grabbed her coat, Burberry cashmere and charcoal, and headed for the elevator. If Dominic Laurent thought he could cancel on her, he'd learn exactly how much influence bought in Manhattan. Brooklyn, Brownsville specifically, where gentrification hit like a slow-motion earthquake, reshaping foundations while people still lived inside. Carlos Thompson's apartment occupied the third floor of a walk-up built in 1952. No elevator radiators that clanked like ghosts arguing. Rent $800 a month, which sounded reasonable until you factored in the 40% increase over 3 years. He stood at the bathroom mirror, razor in hand, while steam fogged the glass. 45 years old, gray, threading his temples, the kind of tired that came from loving hard and losing harder. On the sink ledge, a photo of Naomi smiled at him, 1985 to 2021, the dates on her headstone, now 3 years past. Daddy, my hair's a mess. Sophia's voice carried from her bedroom that particular pitch of 7-year-old distress that meant an actual problem, not drama. Carlos wiped shaving cream from his jaw and headed to her room. The space measured 8 by 10 walls painted purple because Naomi had promised to do it together. Carlos had finished it alone 2 months after the funeral while Sophia slept at his mother's house. Now his daughter sat cross-legged on her bed wearing the dress Naomi had bought for her 5th birthday, purple with tiny silver stars, hem already too short because kids grew and memories didn't. Come here, baby girl. Sophia climbed into his lap and Carlos pulled the scrunchie from her braids, fingers working through the sections with the practice of 3 year solo parenting. He'd learned from YouTube videos at 2 a.m. from Naomi's sister, who flew in from Atlanta for a week from trial and error, while Sophia sat patient as a saint. We're going to Mommy's restaurant tonight, right? Her voice held hope and anxiety braided together. Carlos's hands paused. That's right. Same table where Mommy and I used to sit. Will she know we're there? The question every parent dreaded, the one with no good answer. Carlos pressed his lips to the top of Sophia's head. She'll know. Your mommy sees everything, remember, bigger than the sky. Sophia repeated it like a prayer. Bigger than the ski. Carlos finished her braids, perfect rows he'd finally mastered, and sent her to find her good shoes. He walked to his own bedroom, barely fit a full bed and a desk where his laptop from 2015 hummed like it was dying. On the screen, Bridge Academy's budget spreadsheet, red numbers screaming. The email sat in his inbox like a ticking bomb. Carlos board meeting Monday. Funding discussion urgent. Foundation donors expressing concerns about program sustainability. Translation, they were cutting him loose. $340,000 a year that kept 50 kids on track for college, kept the lights on, kept hope alive in a neighborhood where hope got gentrified out along with everything else. Carlos had built this program from nothing. Him and 6 other community members meeting in a church basement, believing education could be armor against displacement. 6 years, 50 kids college-bound. Jerome heading to MYT scholarship applications submitted. Maya learning calculus. Dozens more fighting for futures the system said they couldn't have. And donors with sustainability concerns because Carlos had declined to smile and nod while their investment portfolios profited from the same gentrification destroying the families he served. His phone showed 6:20. The reservation was for 7. Carlos looked at the notice taped to his desk, final notice, rent overdue, and then at his checking account balance, $62. Naomi would have told him it was fine. Naomi would have said some things matter more than money, that showing up matters, that Sophia's memory of her mother's special place mattered more than bills that would get paid somehow. Naomi had believed in magic like that. Carlos just believed in working harder. Daddy, I can't find my shoes. He smiled despite everything and went to help his daughter search. La Maison Elise occupied a corner of the Upper East Side where old money and new collided, where reservations required 3 months' notice, and the chef had 2 Michelin stars. Rachel arrived at 7:05, Mercedes S-Class, parked by valet Dominic Laurent, already approaching with that particular smile Maitre D's wore when delivering bad news to wealthy people. Miss Carter, I'm tremendously sorry, but there's been an unforeseen circumstance regarding your reservation. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Around them, the restaurant hummed, couples in designer clothes, families laughing, the warm glow of people who belonged. What circumstance? Dominic's hands performed a small ballet of regret. A guest with significant standing has made a compelling offer for your table. $5,000. I'm sure you understand. It's simply good business to accommodate. You're telling me you sold my reservation? Not a question. Rachel's voice stayed level, that boardroom calm, but ice crystallized underneath. Dominic's smile never wavered. I prefer to think of it as responding to market conditions. Naturally, I can offer you a prime slot 2 weeks from tonight with my personal assurance of I'll pay 10,000 right now. The smile flickered. Miss Carter, I truly wish I could accommodate you, but the gentleman has already confirmed his party is en route. Perhaps if you'd reserved further in advance. Rachel wanted to laugh. She'd hosted business dinners here monthly, had Dominic's personal cell number, had left tips that exceeded most people's monthly grocery bills. And now because someone offered more cash, she was being dismissed like any ordinary patron without connections. Like the girl from West Virginia who'd once been told she couldn't afford the menu. I understand. She turned toward the exit, each step measured, refusing to let Dominic see her flinch. Behind her, champagne corks popped, couples embraced, everyone certain of their place in the world. The doors loomed ahead, heavy glass etched with gold, separating the included from the excluded. Rachel's hand touched the brass handle when movement caught her peripheral vision. A man entering with a little girl, the child's dress, purple and silver, too short in the sleeves. The girl's eyes went wide at the restaurant's interior chandeliers, like frozen fireworks, tables set with more silverware than seemed necessary, the kind of place that existed in movies but not in real life. Dominic approached them with that same smile and Rachel paused. Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid there's been a change regarding your reservation. The man's face stayed calm, but Rachel watched his hand tighten on his daughter's shoulder, protective, instinctive. I made this reservation 6 months ago. Same table my wife and I always. Yes, I have the record. However, a patron with greater resources has made an offer that simply cannot be refused. $5,000 for your slot. I'm sure you understand, Mr. Thompson. It's simply economics. Dominic's tone shifted on the man's name, subtle but unmistakable. The condescension of someone who'd already decided this family didn't belong. Rachel recognized that tone. She'd heard it in her childhood before her last name opened doors instead of closing them. The little girl looked up at her father. Daddy. The man Thompson met Dominic's eyes, and Rachel saw something she recognized, the swallowing of pride, the calculation of whether fighting mattered, the exhaustion of being dismissed by people who'd never questioned their right to dismiss. I see. Come on, Sophia. He turned and the girl's hand slipped into his, her face falling. They walked toward the exit, toward Rachel, toward the cold December night, and whatever Plan B looked like when you'd saved for 6 months for Plan A. Rachel's brain performed rapid calculations. Dominic had sold both their reservations, hers for $10,000 to someone unnamed, his for $5,000 to someone else. Probably selling to the highest bidders all night, maximizing profit on New Year's Eve demand. Economics, market conditions, good business. Everything she'd built her empire on weaponized against people who'd done nothing wrong except have less money. The man and his daughter were 10 feet away when Rachel spoke. Excuse me. They paused. The girl looked up, gap-toothed smile braids, perfect eyes that held both hope and the learned wariness of kids who'd been disappointed before. The man's expression stayed guarded. I'm Rachel Carter. I couldn't help overhearing Dominic gave me the same speech. Understanding flickered across the man's face. Looks like we both got priced out. Rachel glanced back at Dominic, who was checking his tablet, probably coordinating the arrival of his higher-paying guests. An idea crystallized, sharp and satisfying. What if we didn't? The man's eyebrow raised. I'm sorry. Dominic said someone offered $5,000 for your table. I'll pay $15,000 for any table in this restaurant right now. And since we're both suddenly without reservations, would you consider sharing? She watched him process it, suspicion, confusion, the automatic wariness of an offer that sounded too good. The little girl tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, she has sad eyes, like you after Mommy left. The man's expression softened and something in Rachel's chest tightened. When had a child last looked at her long enough to notice her eyes? I'm Carlos Thompson. This is my daughter, Sophia. He extended his hand. Rachel took it, noting the calluses, the firm grip, the way he didn't try to impress or intimidate. If you're sure about this. Rachel turned back to the dining room where Dominic was approaching another couple, his smile wide and welcoming. She walked straight to him, Carlos and Sophia following. Dominic, I'm paying $15,000 for a table, now, and we'll take whatever you have available. His smile faltered. Miss Carter, I've already explained that the tables are $15,000, cash equivalent transferred to the restaurant account before we sit down. Do you have a table or should I call the owner directly? Dominic's face performed several calculations. The owner of La Maison, Elise Pierre Beaumont, had personally approved Rachel's corporate account 5 years ago. One call from her and Dominic would be explaining his auction system to someone who'd fire him for it. Of course, Miss Carter, I believe we can accommodate your party. If you'll just give me one moment to arrange seating. He disappeared into the dining room. Carlos leaned close to Rachel, voice low. You didn't have to do this. I know, but Dominic needs to learn that not everyone can be bought or sold. Sophia looked up at Rachel with those luminous eyes. Are you a superhero? Because you sound like one. Despite herself, despite the anger still humming in her veins, Rachel smiled. No, sweetheart, I'm just someone who's tired of people like Dominic deciding who gets to belong. Dominic returned his professional mask back in place. Right this way, please. We've prepared a lovely table near the window. They followed him into the dining room, past tables of people who looked like they'd never questioned their reservation status, past waiters gliding with champagne, past the whole ecosystem of privilege that Rachel had fought to enter and now found herself questioning. The table sat in a corner, windows overlooking the street where snow had started to fall. Not the premium center tables, but private, quiet, a view that felt like a secret. Dominic pulled out chairs with performative grace. Your server will be with you momentarily. And Miss Carter, I'll need your payment information. Rachel handed him her black Amex without a word. He disappeared, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Rachel sat at a restaurant table with no business agenda, no networking goal, no transaction to complete. Just a stranger and his daughter brought together by mutual rejection. Sophia immediately pulled crayons from a small backpack, spreading them across the white tablecloth like treasure. Carlos's hand moved to stop her, then paused, letting his daughter claim the space. He looked at Rachel. Thank you for this. I know it's... Sophia's mother and I used to come here for anniversaries, special occasions. This was her favorite place. Past tense. Rachel heard it in the careful way he spoke, the grief still fresh enough to hurt. Used to. She passed away 3 years ago. Car accident. But we'd promised Sophia we'd keep the tradition. Come here on New Year's Eve. Remember the good times. Sophia didn't look up from her drawing, but her small voice added, Mommy said some places hold love even after people leave. This place holds her love. Rachel's throat tightened. She'd spent 2 decades building wealth, power, influence, and this child understood something about value that Rachel had forgotten existed. That's a beautiful way to think about it. Sophia beamed, gap-toothed and radiant. Do you have someone to hold love with? Carlos's eyes widened. Sophia, that's not... It's okay. Rachel looked at the little girl, at her innocent curiosity, and chose honesty. No, I don't. I've spent so long building my career that I forgot to build anything else. Sophia nodded seriously. That's sad, but you can start now. Mommy used to say it's never too late to plant flowers. The server arrived with menus, with wine lists, with the whole orchestrated dance of fine dining. Rachel ordered without looking. She'd eaten here enough times to know the menu by heart. Carlos studied his menu with the concentration of someone calculating costs, and Rachel felt a flash of shame. 15,000 to Dominic, and this man was worried about appetizer prices. Order whatever you want. Please, this is my treat. Carlos looked up, and she saw pride war with practicality. That's generous, but I insist, consider it a thank you for saving me from eating alone on New Year's Eve. Something shifted in his expression, acceptance mixed with discomfort, and Rachel realized she'd made her first mistake of the evening. She'd positioned herself as benefactor, him as recipient, when what she'd wanted was just company. But Sophia was already announcing she wanted the pasta with the fancy cheese name, and could she please have sparkling water like grown-ups, and the moment passed into the comfortable chaos of ordering food. The meal unfolded in unexpected rhythms. Sophia chattered between bites, telling Rachel about her school, about her teacher, Miss Chen, who was nice but talked too loud about the art program that got canceled because of budget cuts. Carlos listened with the patience of a father who'd heard these stories before, but valued them anyway. Rachel found herself watching them, the easy affection, the way Carlos cut Sophia's food without being asked, the way Sophia reached for his hand, when she laughed like joy required physical contact to be real. This was what family looked like when it wasn't performed for cameras or quarterly reports. What do you do, Mr. Thompson? Carlos wiped his daughter's mouth with the napkin. I run a community education program in Brooklyn, Bridge Academy. We help kids from low-income families get into college. Rachel's mind cataloged nonprofit sector, underfunded, probably overworked. The kind of work that paid in impact instead of dollars. How many students? 50 in the program right now. We've gotten 43 into college over the past 6 years. MIT, Columbia, NYU, mostly CUNY schools, which are excellent, wherever they can get the best aid packages. Pride colored his voice, the quiet satisfaction of someone who measured success in other people's futures. Rachel felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. Envy, maybe, or recognition of a road she'd never taken. That's remarkable. It's necessary. These kids are brilliant, but the system's stacked against them. Property taxes fund schools, so poor neighborhoods get worse education, which perpetuates poverty, which means the next generation gets worse education. We're trying to break the cycle. Sophia added through a mouthful of pasta, Daddy helps kids dream bigger than the sky. Carlos's smile went soft. That's right, baby girl. Bigger than the sky. The phrase held weight repeated often enough to be ritual. Rachel filed it away charmed despite herself. And what about you, Miss Carter? What do you do? The question felt loaded, though Carlos's tone suggested genuine curiosity. Rachel hesitated. She could give her usual answer, CEO of Carter Industries, Tech and Investment, Portfolio Global Operations. But something about this table this night, these people made her want to be more than a title. I help run a big business, technology and investments mostly. Sophia's eyes lit up. Like a boss, are you someone's boss? I suppose I am. That's cool. Do you tell people what to do all day? Rachel almost laughed. Sometimes, though mostly I solve problems and make decisions. What kind of problems? How to explain mergers and acquisitions to a 7-year-old, Rachel searched for simple terms. Well, if a company is struggling, I help figure out how to make it stronger. Or if two companies want to work together, I help make that happen. Sophia nodded sagely. Like when me and Emma wanted to build a fort, but we only had half the blankets each. We had to work together. Exactly like that. Carlos was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, assessment maybe, or curiosity. Then his phone buzzed and his face tightened. He glanced at the screen, jaw clenching before putting it away. Everything okay? He forced a smile. Just work. It can wait. But Rachel saw the lie, saw the stress underneath. She knew that look, the expression of someone juggling bills, deadlines, crises that couldn't wait, but had to. She'd worn it herself once before success insulated her from consequences. The conversation turned to lighter topics. Favorite movies? Sophia loved anything with animals. Carlos admitted to watching too many documentaries. Books they'd read. The snow falling outside already coating the sidewalks in white. They talked until dessert arrived, until the restaurant filled with champagne anticipation, until the distant sound of crowds gathering in Times Square filtered through the glass. Then Carlos asked the question that changed everything. Has this neighborhood always been like this? This expensive? Rachel blinked. I'm not sure what you mean. Carlos gestured at the window at the street beyond. La Maison Elise has been here for 15 years. Used to be people from all over the city came here. Teachers, nurses, regular folks saving up for special occasions. Now, he trailed off, but Rachel understood. Now it was people who could pay $15,000 for a table, who could outbid working families for reservations, who treated restaurants like investment opportunities. Things change. Carlos's expression hardened slightly. Change isn't the right word. This neighborhood has been systematically transformed. 5 years ago, my program served families who lived within walking distance. Now 73 families from our program have been displaced in the past 6 years. The number hit Rachel like cold water. Displaced, well, rent increases 40 to 60% in 3 years. Landlords selling to developers who convert affordable housing into luxury condos. Small businesses getting priced out, replaced by boutiques and organic markets. Mrs. Chen ran a grocery store here for 20 years gone, replaced by a Whole Foods. Sophia added quietly, my friend Emma had to move. Her mommy cried. Rachel's mind raced. She knew about gentrification academically, had read think pieces, attended panels where people discussed urban development like chess strategy. But hearing it from someone living through it, from a child who'd lost a friend to market forces, made it visceral. That's, I didn't realize it was that widespread. Carlos leaned back and Rachel caught something in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, that she lived in a world where 73 displaced families registered as news. Most people don't. The data's there if you look. Median rent up 48%, median income up 3%. 12 small businesses closed, replaced by chains. Schools losing funding because families can't afford to stay. He stopped himself, seeming to remember he was talking to a stranger at dinner, not testifying before a city council. His voice softened. "I'm sorry, this isn't exactly light conversation for New Year's Eve." "No, it's important." Rachel meant it. Something about the specificity, 73 families, 48%, 12 businesses, made it real in a way abstractions never had. These weren't statistics. They were Carlos's students, Sophia's friends, communities dissolving under economic pressure. And somewhere in her mind, a question formed. Where did Carter Industries fit into this equation? She pushed the thought away. Not tonight. Tonight was about being present, about this unexpected dinner, about two people who'd been rejected by the same system and chosen to sit together anyway. Sophia yawned, the kind of jaw-cracking yawn that signaled a 7-year-old past her bedtime. Carlos checked his watch. Almost 11. We should probably think about heading out before the crowds get too bad. Reluctance colored his voice, like he wanted to stay, but knew better. Rachel felt a similar pull, surprising herself. When had she last enjoyed a meal this much? When had conversation felt like discovery instead of transaction? "Can I see you again?" The words came out before Rachel could calculate risk versus reward, professional versus personal, whether this crossed some line she had drawn without realizing. Carlos's expression shifted, surprise, then something guarded. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because our worlds are very different, Miss Carter. You pay $15,000 for a table like it's nothing. I work 3 jobs to keep my daughter in a safe neighborhood." The honesty stung because it was accurate. Rachel lived in a penthouse that cost more than Carlos probably earned in 5 years. Their lives occupied the same city, but entirely different universes. Maybe that's exactly why we should. Carlos studied her face, searching for something, sincerity maybe, or ulterior motive. Sophia's hand tugged on his sleeve. "I like her, Daddy. She has kind eyes under the sad." And whatever Carlos saw in Rachel's expression or heard in his daughter's voice made him soften. "All right, coffee maybe. But I need to be clear, I'm not looking for charity or connections or whatever else people usually want when they befriend someone like me." "I'm not looking for any of that either. I'm just tired of eating alone." Truth raw and unpolished. Carlos's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "Okay, coffee." They exchanged numbers, Rachel typing his contact into her phone while Sophia watched like this was the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed. Dominic appeared with the check, $15,000, plus the meal itself totaling just over $16,000 for 3 hours of dinner. Rachel signed without looking at the total. Money she'd spend without thinking for an evening that had unexpectedly mattered. Outside, snow fell heavier now, coating the city in temporary beauty. Carlos hailed a cab, lifting Sophia into his arms when her legs got tired. The girl's head drooped onto his shoulder, eyes already closing. "Thank you for tonight, really. Sophia will remember this." "So will I." Rachel meant it more than Carlos probably realized. He climbed into the cab, careful not to wake his daughter, and the yellow vehicle disappeared into traffic, taillights fading into snow and midnight. Rachel stood on the sidewalk, watching them go, surrounded by couples, streaming towards celebrations she had no desire to attend. Her phone buzzed Elena, probably checking if she needed anything. Rachel ignored it. Instead, she thought about 73 families displaced, about budget cuts, affecting children's art programs, about the specific way Carlos's jaw had tightened when his phone buzzed with bad news he couldn't address during dinner. About the fact that somewhere in the machinery of her own company, her investments might be contributing to exactly the problems Carlos fought against. The thought followed her into another cab, through the midnight countdown she barely noticed, back to her penthouse, where champagne waited unopened and the city sparkled below, like a promise it had no intention of keeping. Rachel stood at her window, Carlos's number in her phone, and wondered if kindness could be learned like any other skill, or if she'd spent so long armoring herself against vulnerability that she'd forgotten how to feel anything genuine at all. 3 blocks away, in a third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, Carlos tucked Sophia into bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering what he'd just agreed to. And in both places separated by geography and circumstance, two people who'd been strangers 4 hours ago fell asleep thinking about the other, neither quite ready to admit it, mattered. Monday morning arrived with the particular cruelty of January 2nd, when holidays ended and reality resumed with interest. Rachel sat in her home office, double espresso, cooling beside her laptop, searching for something she told herself was professional curiosity and nothing more. Bridge Academy. Brooklyn appeared in the search results, a simple website clearly built on a template, photos of students in a community center that had seen better decades. The mission statement avoided jargon. We believe every kid deserves a shot at college regardless of their zip code. Underneath statistics, 50 students currently enrolled, 43 college acceptances over 6 years, 87% retention rate. A roster of partner universities. Testimonials from parents in English and Spanish, both talking about sons and daughters who'd been first in their families to attend college. Rachel clicked through to the staff page. Carlos Thompson, director. The photo showed him in a classroom mid-explanation, hands gesturing at a whiteboard covered in equations. No bio beyond a Columbia University notation and the phrase dedicated to educational equity. Columbia. Rachel's fingers paused on the keyboard. She pulled up LinkedIn Professional Stalker's Paradise and found his profile sparse but revealing. PhD in Education Policy 2008. Graduate teaching assistant during his doctorate. Published articles in journals Rachel had never heard of, but whose names sounded legitimately academic. Then buried 3 scrolls down: UNESCO consultant 2012 to 2015. Kenya, Brazil, Philippines. Educational equity programs in developing nations. Rachel sat back. The man she'd met, worn jacket, careful menu calculations, 3-job exhaustion, had credentials that could have landed him tenure-track positions at top universities. Instead, he ran a community program in a neighborhood where funding dried up faster than promises. Her phone buzzed. Elena. Miss Carter, the CFO, sent the Q4 portfolio analysis. Brooklyn real estate holdings are performing exceptionally, 18% returns. He's recommending we accelerate acquisitions in the Brownsville corridor. Rachel's stomach dropped. Send me the full report. Of course. Also, the foundation directors are meeting Wednesday about community grant allocations. Should I confirm your attendance? Yes. Rachel hung up and opened the file Elena had forwarded. Pages of data, property addresses, acquisition dates, projected returns. Carter Industries owned a 12% stake in Riverside Development, LLC, which had purchased 47 properties in Brownsville over the past 6 years. The same 6 years, Carlos had documented 73 family displacements. Rachel cross-referenced addresses against a map of Brooklyn, her hands moving faster now, that analytical mind that made her a Fortune cover subject kicking into overdrive. The properties Riverside bought clustered around specific blocks near Bridge Academy, near transit lines, near exactly the infrastructure that made neighborhoods valuable once you cleared out the people who couldn't afford the transformation. Her company hadn't directly evicted anyone, but the returns, 18% exceptional performance, accelerate acquisitions, came from somewhere. Came from rent increases that displaced Carlos's students' families. Came from the economic pressure that closed Mrs. Chen's grocery store. Rachel's coffee had gone cold. She pushed it away and kept digging. The foundation that funded Bridge Academy, Morris Community Trust, showed up in her network 3 layers deep. Major donors included several Carter Industries board members. The same people profiting from Brownsville gentrification were giving token amounts to educational programs, serving the families their investments displaced. Charity as tax write-off. Helping as optics. Everything Rachel had built her empire on suddenly looking like a shell game, where the house always won and working families always lost. Her phone rang. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. Miss Carter, this is Carlos Thompson from New Year's Eve. Rachel's throat tightened. Carlos, hi. How are you? Good. Sophia hasn't stopped talking about the princess lady with sad eyes. I think you made an impression. Despite everything on her screen, Rachel smiled. She made an impression on me too. Very wise for 7. She has her moments. Listen, I know we talked about coffee, but I'm swamped this week. The program's going through some funding complications, and what kind of complications? The question came out sharper than intended. Carlos paused. Nothing dramatic, just donor concerns about sustainability. Happens every year, usually resolves itself. Liar, Rachel thought, but kindly. She could hear the stress underneath his casual tone. I'd still like that coffee. Maybe I could come to UC Bridge Academy. Another pause longer this time. You want to visit Brownsville? The way he said it, surprise mixed with something harder, made Rachel realize how her offer sounded. Rich white woman slumming in the poor neighborhood, poverty tourism dressed as interest. I want to understand what you do, if that's okay. Tomorrow afternoon we have SAT prep running, but you could sit in if you're interested in watching teenagers suffer through vocabulary. I'll be there. Carlos gave her the address and hung up. Rachel stared at her screen, at the web of investments and displacements, at the machinery of profit she'd helped build, and wondered if understanding would be enough, or if some things once broken stayed broken. Bridge Academy occupied the ground floor of a building that probably violated several safety codes but ran on community determination instead of compliance. Rachel arrived at 2 p.m. Tuesday, Mercedes looking conspicuous on streets where most cars were at least a decade old. The entrance led through a former retail space plate, glass windows now covered with student artwork, and college acceptance letters arranged like victory flags. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over tables where teenagers bent over practice tests, pencils scratching the focused silence of kids who knew their futures depended on scores and scholarships. Carlos stood near a whiteboard helping a young man work through a math problem. He glanced up when Rachel entered, surprise flickering across his face before he smiled. Give me 5 minutes. Rachel nodded and took a seat in the back watching. The student 16, maybe 17, wearing a Nets jersey, struggled with algebra until Carlos drew a basketball court on the whiteboard. Jerome, you know trajectories, right? When you shoot a three-pointer, you're calculating parabolic motion. This equation is the same thing. The ball's your variable. The hoop's your solution. Understanding dawned on Jerome's face. He worked through the problem again this time, seeing past abstraction to application, and got it right. That's it. You just needed to translate math into a language you already speak. Carlos moved to the next student, patient and precise, making calculus relevant to a girl who wanted to be an engineer, making statistics matter to a boy interested in sports medicine. Rachel watched him teach, not lecturing, but connecting, finding the thread between what they knew and what they needed to learn. This was competence of a different order than board meetings and acquisition strategies. This required seeing people as individuals, understanding how they learned, caring enough to meet them where they lived. When the session ended, students packed up with the efficient chaos of teenagers. Jerome approached Carlos with a printout. Mr. T, my MIT application needs another recommendation letter. Could you, Tom? Already wrote it. Check your email. Jerome's face split into a grin. You're the best. You're going to be the best. Just keep working. The room emptied. Carlos gestured for Rachel to follow him to his office, a closet really barely fitting a desk and 2 chairs. Books crammed every surface, college catalogs mixed with educational theory texts, a framed photo of Naomi and Sophia on the desk's one clear corner. Sorry for the mess. We're not exactly swimming in space. Rachel looked around, cataloging details. On one wall, a map of Brooklyn, with colored pins marking student homes. Over the past 6 years, the pins had migrated, pushed north, pushed east, away from gentrifying corridors. You're tracking displacement. Carlos followed her gaze. Trying to. Every time a student's family gets priced out, I document it. Addresses, dates, rent, increases, new ownership. Been doing it since 2018. Why? Yeah, because someone should. Because these aren't statistics, they're families. Maria's parents, Jerome's grandmother, all of them. If I don't track it, it's like it never happened. He pulled out a binder, worn edges suggesting frequent reference. Inside, meticulous documentation, spreadsheets with rent comparisons, property records showing sales and conversions, timelines connecting acquisitions to evictions. 237 pages so far, 73 families displaced. Pattern's pretty clear when you look at it long enough. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she turned pages. Here was the human cost of 18% returns, the names and stories behind portfolio performance. the specific devastation her investments had helped create. What are you going to do with this? Carlos leaned against his desk. Present it to city council eventually. Advocate for rent stabilization, maybe community land trusts so families can own property collectively. It's a long shot, but doing nothing guarantees nothing changes. Have you identified the developers? Mostly Riverside Development. They're the biggest player, but there are others. Whole ecosystem of firms buying low, renovating, selling high. Legal, technically. Just destroys communities in the process. Rachel's throat felt tight. I should tell you something. Carlos's expression shifted, reading her tone. Okay? My company, Carter Industries, we own 12% of Riverside Development. I didn't know until this morning, but we're part of the problem you're documenting. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Carlos's jaw tightened, then loosened, emotions cycling too fast to track. You own part of Riverside. Yes. And you came here today knowing that. Yes. He looked at her like she was a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit. Why, Pue? Because I wanted to understand what my investments actually do. Because numbers on a spreadsheet don't mean anything until you see Jerome worrying about recommendations and Maria's family getting displaced. Because her voice caught. Because I think I've been so focused on never being poor again that I forgot what poverty actually costs. Carlos studied her face, searching for manipulation or performance. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because his expression softened slightly. What are you going to do about it? I don't know yet, but I'm not going to keep profiting from displacement. That's a start. The tension eased but didn't disappear. They moved to safer topics: Sophia's upcoming science fair, Jerome's MYT, chances the ways college admissions favored wealth while pretending to be merit-based. Carlos talked about his work with a passion that made Rachel realize how little passion she brought to her own. When had she last cared about something more than quarterly returns? Before she left, Carlos showed her the wall of acceptance letters: Columbia, NYUC, UNYMIT, dozens of schools that had taken chances on kids from zip codes that usually got rejected. Each letter represented a life trajectory, altered a family's hope, validated a system beaten at its own game. This is incredible work. Carlos shrugged. It's necessary work. There's a difference. Rachel drove home through Brooklyn streets that looked different now, seeing not property values but people, not investment opportunities, but communities, not economic efficiency, but human cost. She had decisions to make, hard ones, the kind that would cost her board approval and shareholder value and everything she'd built her identity around. But first coffee, then maybe dinner, then figuring out if someone who'd spent 2 decades perfecting emotional isolation could learn to care about something beyond profit margins. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm Rachel hadn't experienced since college: anticipation, nervousness, the particular awareness of someone waiting for your text. They met for coffee in Prospect Park, where January cold kept crowds minimal and conversations felt private despite the public setting. Carlos talked about his students, about the systemic barriers they faced, about educational theory, with the fluency of someone who'd actually read the research. Rachel found herself asking questions, genuine curiosity replacing networking reflex. During their third meeting, Sophia appeared released early from school due to a broken heating system. She ran to Rachel like they were old friends, chattering about her science project, a volcano made from recycled materials, because art supplies were too expensive. Emma's mom bought her a real microscope. I just have my magnifying glass from the dollar store. The comment landed casually, but Rachel saw Carlos's jaw tighten, that particular shame of parents who couldn't provide what other kids had. Later, after Sophia wandered off to play on the swings, Rachel asked, what would it take to get better science supplies for her class? Carlos's expression shuddered. Rachel, I appreciate the thought, but I'm just asking. And I'm just saying that Sophia doesn't need expensive things. She needs creativity, persistence, the ability to make do. Those skills matter more than equipment. The boundary was clear, firmly drawn. Rachel nodded and changed subjects, but the seed had been planted. That weekend, a package arrived at Carlos's apartment: professional-grade art supplies, sable brushes, imported pigments, a wooden case with brass hinges. The card read, "Every artist needs proper tools. R." Sophia's shriek of joy could probably be heard across the borough. She immediately started sorting brushes. examining each one like sacred artifacts, her face radiant with the particular happiness of getting something you wanted but never expected. Carlos called that evening voice carefully neutral. The art supplies arrived. Good, I hoped they would. Rachel, this set cost more than my grocery budget for 2 months. Surprise flickered through her. I didn't look at the price, I know what you wanted and I appreciate the intention, but Sophia doesn't need $500 brushes. She needs presence consistency things that can't be bought. The words hit harder than he probably intended. Rachel sat in her penthouse, surrounded by things she'd bought to fill the space where people should be, and realized Carlos was describing her entire problem. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Thank you. But she did. Not immediately. She waited 2 weeks, tried to be thoughtful. When Carlos mentioned his program's funding concerns, she researched the budget gap and drafted an anonymous donation plan for $340,000. When Sophia's school sent home information about an elite art camp, Rachel pulled strings to get her application prioritized. When Carlos's laptop died mid-project, a new one appeared at his door the next day. Top-of-the-line MacBook Pro $3,000 note attached, just returning the favor for New Year's Eve. Carlos stood in his doorway holding the unopened box, face cycling through emotions too fast to separate. I can't accept this. Rachel had anticipated the call. It's a tool for your work. You help kids find futures. You shouldn't be held back by outdated equipment. That's not the point. His voice had gone cold, the warmth she'd gotten used to replaced by something harder. The point is, I didn't ask for this. I don't need you solving my problems. I'm not trying to solve anything. I just want to help. Help, the word came out flat, void of inflection. Every time you help, it feels like you're trying to fix us. Like we're broken and you're the one with the tools. Rachel's face flushed. That's not fair. I care about you. Both of you. I'm just trying to buy your way into our lives, trying to prove your worth through spending. I don't know, Rachel. What are you trying to do? The question hung between them, loaded with everything unsaid. Rachel's hands trembled slightly. I'm trying to be part of something that matters. I've spent 20 years measuring my value by my bank account. You and Sophia make me feel like maybe there's another way to matter. Silence. Then Carlos's voice gentler but still firm. Then matter by being here, not by writing checks or sending gifts or pulling strings. When you swoop in with your money and connections, it makes me feel like nothing I've built matters, like I'm not enough on my own. The vulnerability in his admission, the raw honesty of a man who'd spent his life proving he didn't need handouts, cut through Rachel's defenses. I didn't know. I didn't think about how it would feel to you. I know, but that's the problem. You're so used to giving things that you don't know how to just be mom. The phone call ended shortly after, polite but distant. Rachel sat in her office, the city glittering below, like all the wealth that had failed to make her happy, and realized she'd spent 2 decades perfecting the wrong skills. She couldn't buy love, couldn't purchase belonging, couldn't solve her way into intimacy. For the first time since leaving West Virginia, Rachel had no idea what to do next. March arrived with the specific cruelty of false spring temperatures rising just enough to promise warmth before freezing again. Rachel had kept her distance from Carlos for 3 weeks, respecting the boundaries he'd drawn, trying to learn what just being looked like when you'd forgotten how. Then the photo appeared, page 6 gossip blog territory, but with enough reach to matter. Rachel and Carlos in Prospect Park, Sophia between them, all three laughing at something off camera. The headline, Tech Billionaire's Secret Romance, Rachel Carter spotted with struggling community organizer. The article speculated wildly, was the child theirs was. This a scandal? Was Carlos a gold digger targeting wealthy women? Comment section predictably toxic, mixing curiosity with thinly veiled racism, questioning what a black man from Brooklyn could possibly offer a billionaire besides ulterior motives. Rachel's PR team handled it with their usual efficiency, calls to editors, threats of legal action, the photo scrubbed from major sites within hours. But screenshots live forever, spreading through social media, picked up by smaller outlets hungry for billionaire drama. Her phone rang, Carlos' voice tight with controlled anger. Have you seen it? Yes, I'm handling it. The photo will be gone by... The photo's already everywhere. My program director got calls from donors this morning. 3 of them are reconsidering their support because of concerns about leadership judgment. Rachel's stomach dropped. How much? $340,000. Annual funding? Suspended pending review of whether Bridge Academy's director maintains appropriate professional boundaries. The euphemism made Rachel's skin crawl. Translation: donors uncomfortable with Carlos dating a white billionaire, or uncomfortable with the publicity, or uncomfortable with anything that reminded them the people they helped were human beings with lives beyond their charity. I'll fix this. I'll call them, explain it's not. You can't fix this, Rachel. That's what you don't understand. You can't control everything. I can try. And that's exactly the problem. He hung up. Rachel stared at her phone, at the photos still cached on her screen, at evidence of something that had felt real, captured, and weaponized against the person she cared about. She called her CFO. Pull up the Riverside Development Holdings funds. I want a full breakdown of Brooklyn acquisitions, projected returns, and buyout options. Miss Carter, those holdings are performing exceptionally. 18% returns, some of the best in our portfolio. Selling now would... I don't care about returns. I want to know what it would cost to divest completely. Silence on the line, the particular quiet of an executive wondering if his boss had lost her mind. I'll have the analysis by end of day. Rachel hung up and opened a new search: community, land trusts, tenant protection laws, rent stabilization advocacy. If she couldn't buy her way into Carlos's life, maybe she could at least stop profiting from destroying it. The analysis arrived at 6 p.m. Divesting from Riverside would cost $8.3 million buyout fees, early termination penalties, lost projected returns. The CFO included a note. This will significantly impact Q2 performance and raise serious questions with the board. Rachel looked at the number, $8.3 million. Rounding error in Carter Industries' total worth, but enough to fund Bridge Academy for 24 years. Enough to help 73 families stay in their homes. Enough to prove that some things mattered more than returns. She drafted the memo, effective immediately. Carter Industries will divest all holdings in residential real estate development targeting low-income neighborhoods. Proceeds to be allocated toward community land trust initiatives and tenant advocacy programs. Before she could second guess, she sent it. Her phone started ringing immediately. Board members, investors, the CFO again, with increasingly urgent questions. Rachel silenced them all and called Carlos. I saw the funding got pulled. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. It feels like it is. Rachel, you can't control the media. You can't control donors. You can't... I know I can't control it, but I can control my company. I just divested $8.3 million from Riverside Development. Silence. You what? I'm pulling Carter Industries out of residential development in low-income neighborhoods. Completely. It'll cost me board support and shareholder confidence, and probably my CEO position, but I can't keep profiting from the displacement you've been documenting. Rachel, I'm not telling you this to impress you or buy my way back into your life. I'm telling you because you were right. I've been trying to fix things instead of being present. But this one thing I can actually fix, and I should have done it weeks ago. Carlos's breathing was audible through the line. The board will fire you. Probably by... You'll lose everything you've built. Not everything, just the parts that were built on other people's suffering. Another pause, longer this time. Why are you really doing this? Rachel looked out her window at the city below, at the neighborhoods where families struggled, while she counted returns at the infrastructure of inequality she'd helped build. Because you taught me that presence matters more than presence, and I can't be present in my own life while ignoring what my money does to others. That's also because I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know how to do that while being the person who made my fortune. Something has to change. I'd rather change myself than lose the chance to figure out what we could be. The confession hung in the air, vulnerable and terrifying. Rachel had spent 2 decades avoiding vulnerability, and now here she was, offering it to someone who might reasonably reject her. I need time. Carlos's voice was soft, conflicted. And I need you to understand this isn't something you can fix with grand gestures. Bridge Academy might not survive losing that funding. My kids, the families I work with, they need stability, not drama. I understand. Dude, because from where I'm standing, your life is about to explode, and the fallout will hit everyone near you. He was right. The board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Whitmore had already sent the agenda, vote of no confidence in CEO leadership. Rachel had built an empire. Tomorrow it might cost her everything. Then I'll make sure the fallout doesn't touch you or Sophia, I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. The line went dead. Rachel sat in her office surrounded by the evidence of success that suddenly looked like wreckage, and wondered if some prices were too high to pay, or if she'd finally found something worth the cost. City Hall's chamber smelled like old wood and newer ambitions, the kind of space where democracy happened in theory while money spoke in practice. Rachel arrived alone, no assistant, no lawyer, wearing a navy suit that cost less than her usual armor, because today wasn't about projecting power. Carlos sat at the front table, Sophia beside him, with Mrs. Chen from 2 floors down. The girl wore her purple dress, the one she'd worn to La Maison Elise 3 months ago, hem still too short but somehow right for the occasion. She waved when she saw Rachel, gap-toothed, smile bright as summer. Rachel waved back and took a seat in the rear, anonymous among the 100-odd people who'd shown up to watch community testimony. Reporters clustered near the front cameras, already sensing the story before it fully materialized. The council president called the session to order. Routine business, first zoning amendments, budget allocations, the bureaucratic machinery that governed 8 million lives. Then the public comment period, where ordinary citizens got 3 minutes to speak truth to indifference, Carlos's name was called. He stood gathering his binder, those 237 pages Rachel had seen in his office, evidence accumulated over 6 years of watching his neighborhood dissolve. He approached the microphone with the calm of someone who'd already lost enough that this couldn't hurt worse. Council members, my name is Carlos Thompson. I direct Bridge Academy, a college prep program in Brownsville serving 50 low-income students. For the past 6 years, I've documented systematic displacement of families from our community. He opened the binder. Maps appeared on the overhead screen, colored pins showing migration patterns. Families pushed steadily north and east as rents climbed beyond reach. 73 families associated with our program have been displaced since 2018. Not relocated by choice, displaced by economic pressure designed to clear neighborhoods for redevelopment. Numbers filled the screen. Median rent increases 48%. Median income growth 3%. The arithmetic of extraction made visible. These aren't statistics. Maria Rodriguez, whose parents were evicted when their landlord sold to Riverside Development. Jerome Washington, whose grandmother lost a rent-controlled apartment she'd lived in for 30 years. 12 small businesses closed and replaced by chains. Mrs. Chen, he gestured toward the elderly woman sitting with Sophia, ran a grocery store here for 2 decades, served the community, knew everyone's names. Now there's a Whole Foods charging $4 for apples. A council member leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, while your documentation is thorough, do you have expertise in urban development policy? The question dripped with polite dismissal, the kind of challenge designed to undermine credibility without appearing overtly hostile. Rachel watched Carlos's expression shift, not anger, but the weary recognition of someone who'd heard this tone before. I have a PhD in education policy from Columbia University. My dissertation examines structural inequality in urban schools, cited in the Department of Education's 2019 Equity Report. He clicked to the next slide. A photo of Carlos at a conference, United Nations backdrop, visible microphone in hand. I consulted for UNESCO from 2012 to 2015, working on educational equity programs in Kenya, Brazil, and the Philippines. I've studied displacement patterns across 12 countries, and the mechanisms here in Brownsville match what I've seen: globally coordinated acquisition, targeted rent increases, systematic erasure of low-income communities. The council member sat back, reassessing. Carlos continued, voice steady. I turned down a position as Dean of Education at Columbia 3 years ago because I believe transformation happens in communities, not conference rooms. These 73 families aren't research subjects. They're my students' parents, my neighbors, the foundation of a community being methodically destroyed for profit. He paused, letting the weight settle. Riverside Development acquired 47 properties in our neighborhood over 6 years, same timeline, same investors. This isn't organic change, it's engineered displacement. And it's legal, which is exactly why we need policy intervention. Rent stabilization, community land trusts. Protections that acknowledge housing as a human right, not just an investment vehicle. Carlos closed his binder and stepped back from the microphone. Applause rippled through the chamber, genuine appreciation for testimony that combined data with humanity, expertise with lived experience. Rachel's hands trembled in her lap. She'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed what she'd say, but rehearsal felt inadequate now that the moment had arrived. The council president checked his list. Next speaker, Rachel Carter. Murmurs spread through the room. Reporters straightened cameras swiveling. Rachel stood and walked to the front, feeling every eye track her movement, aware that what happened in the next 3 minutes would define everything that followed. She reached the microphone and looked out at the crowd. Carlos met her gaze, surprise and something else, concern maybe, or anticipation flickering across his face. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm CEO of Carter Industries, a technology and investment firm with holdings valued at $2.1 billion. The room went silent, that particular quiet when people recalibrate assumptions. Our portfolio includes a 12% stake in Riverside Development, the company Mr. Thompson identified as the primary driver of displacement in Brownsville. Those holdings generated 18% returns last quarter, exceptional performance by Wall Street standards. She paused, let the numbers land. I didn't know about these specific investments until 6 weeks ago. Carter Industries manages hundreds of holdings through subsidiary firms, and I delegated oversight to portfolio managers focused exclusively on returns. That ignorance doesn't constitute innocence. The profits reached my shareholders regardless of whether I personally signed the purchase orders. Margaret Whitmore stood abruptly in the audience, face flushed. Miss Carter, this testimony now is inappropriate. You're damaging shareholder interest. Rachel's voice cut through. Mrs. Whitmore, you told me my mother understood leadership. My mother died alone in a house filled with awards, in empty rooms, convinced that success required sacrificing everything soft. I won't make that mistake. She turned back to the council, but her words carried to the entire chamber. I grew up in West Virginia in a single-wide trailer park where my father worked the coal mines for 30 years. When I was 12, the mine closed. I watched my father, a man who'd never missed a shift, who'd sacrificed his health for his family, sit at our kitchen table, unable to make rent. I watched the landlord come to our door, watched my mother cry, watched privilege walk past us like we were invisible. Rachel's voice caught emotion bleeding through professional composure. I promised myself I'd never be powerless like that again. I'd never be the poor girl turned away at doors, dismissed by people who measured worth in dollars. So I built a company, made a fortune, became exactly the kind of person who used to terrify me. She looked directly at Carlos. 3 months ago, I met Mr. Thompson and his daughter at La Maison Elise, a restaurant where we'd both had our reservations sold to higher bidders. We shared a table because neither of us had anywhere else to go. Over dinner, he told me about 73 families displaced from Brownsville. I listened and felt terrible about the injustice. Her hands gripped the podium. Then I went home and discovered my company was part of the machine causing that injustice. That the returns I celebrated, the portfolio performance I'd been praised for, came directly from the displacement Mr. Thompson had spent 6 years documenting. I'd spent 20 years making sure I'd never be the poor girl turned away at the door. And in the process, I became the one holding the door shut to others. The admission hung in the air, raw and irreversible. Rachel felt her carefully constructed identity cracking the armor of success, revealing the person underneath. Still that 12-year-old girl from West Virginia, still terrified of powerlessness, still trying to prove she deserved to exist. 2 weeks ago, I ordered Carter Industries to divest completely from Riverside Development and all residential real estate projects targeting low-income neighborhoods. The divestment will cost $8.3 million in buyout fees, penalties, and lost projected returns. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Whitmore looked apoplectic, other board members conferring in urgent whispers. That money will fund community land trust legal structures, allowing families to collectively own property, preventing exactly the kind of displacement Mr. Thompson documented. 73 families will have first access to these trusts with rent stabilization guarantees and paths to ownership. Rachel's voice strengthened. Additionally, I'm resigning as CEO of Carter Industries effective immediately. The board will vote on my replacement tomorrow. I'm starting a new firm, Carter Community Capital, focused exclusively on ethical development that prioritizes community stability over maximum returns. Mr. Thompson has agreed to serve on the advisory board, ensuring we listen to communities rather than dictating to them. She looked at Carlos, whose face registered shock. They hadn't discussed this detail. Rachel had made the decision last night, sitting alone in her penthouse, realizing that incremental reform inside Carter Industries would never be enough. I can't undo 6 years of displacement. I can't restore Mrs. Chen's grocery store or give back the homes families lost. But I can stop contributing to the problem, and I can dedicate resources towards solutions that center community needs rather than investor returns. The council president cleared his throat. Miss Carter, you understand you're forfeiting substantial personal wealth with these decisions. I understand. I also understand that I've had substantial personal wealth for 20 years, and it's never once made me as happy as one dinner with a man and his daughter who showed me kindness when I had nowhere else to go. Rachel stepped away from the microphone. The chamber erupted, some applause, some angry muttering, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. She walked back to her seat, legs shaking, aware she'd just detonated her entire professional life in 3 minutes of public testimony. Carlos caught her arm as she passed. You didn't tell me about the advisory board. I'm telling you now, if you'll consider it. His eyes searched her face, looking for performance or manipulation, finding only exhaustion and something like hope. We'll talk. Not a commitment, but not a rejection either. Rachel nodded and sat down, hands trembling, while the council debated motions and the machinery of democracy ground slowly toward action. The vote came 90 minutes later, 9-2 in favor of emergency rent stabilization measures for Brownsville, with immediate study of community land trust implementation citywide. Not everything Carlos had asked for, but enough to matter enough to start. Dominic Laurent lost his position at La Maison Elise within 48 hours, the restaurant launching an internal investigation into reservation sales practices that revealed a pattern of discrimination and exploitation. The ownership transferred the business to a cooperative model with staff buying in as partners. Bridge Academy's funding was restored, the original $340,000 plus, an additional $200,000 from donors impressed by Carlos's testimony and credentials. Jerome got his MIT acceptance 2 weeks later, scholarship covering full tuition. Margaret Whitmore led the board vote that removed Rachel as CEO by a margin of 8-4. Carter Industries stock dropped 12% on the news, recovered 6% when the new CEO announced that a return to traditional investment strategies, and plateaued somewhere between damage control and uncertain future. Rachel cleaned out her office on a Friday afternoon, packing personal items into 3 boxes that barely filled the trunk of her Mercedes. 2 decades of work reduced to photographs and awards that suddenly looked like monuments to misplaced priorities. Her phone buzzed. Elena. Miss Carter, where should I forward your correspondence? Rachel rattled off her home address, the penthouse she was already planning to sell. And Elena, thank you for everything. I'm sorry this ended so abruptly. Don't be. What you did at City Hall, my family's from Brownsville. My abuela lost her apartment last year to Riverside Development. When you spoke up, you spoke for people who couldn't speak for themselves. That matters more than job security. The call ended. Rachel sat in her empty office looking at the city sprawling below and felt lighter than she had in years. 1 year later, New Year's Eve arrived with better weather than the previous year, cold, but clear stars visible between buildings, that particular New York magic when the city decided to cooperate with celebrations. La Maison Elise had transformed under cooperative ownership. The menu stayed French. The quality remained high, but prices dropped to levels where teachers and nurses could save up for special occasions without needing second mortgages. The staff, now co-owners, moved through the dining room with the confidence of people who belonged rather than served. Rachel arrived at 6:30, not in a Mercedes anymore, but in a practical Subaru more suited to her new life in Brownsville. She'd sold the penthouse 8 months ago, bought a brownstone 3 blocks from Bridge Academy, discovered that community made better company than square footage. Carlos waited at the entrance, wearing a suit that actually fit, purchased with the raise that came from Bridge Academy's expansion to 3 Brooklyn locations. Sophia stood beside him, 8 now gap-toothed smile replaced by adult teeth, but the same luminous joy in her eyes. Miss Rachel. The girl ran forward and Rachel caught her in a hug, marveling at how natural the gesture felt after a year of practice. Hi, sweetheart. You look beautiful. Sophia wore a new dress, still purple, but this one fit properly, bought with money from the art scholarship she'd won for her recycled materials volcano project. Daddy says we're sitting at Mommy's table, the special one by the window. Rachel looked at Carlos over Sophia's head. Are you sure? I'm sure Naomi would have liked you. She always said. He paused, voice catching slightly. She said it's never too late to plant flowers. Turns out she was right. They followed the host Marcus, a former waiter now co-owner, to the corner table where Rachel and Carlos had shared their first meal. The window overlooked streets where snow had started falling, coating Brooklyn in temporary beauty. The past year played through Rachel's mind in flashes. Carter Community Capital's launch, funded by liquidating her Carter Industries holdings, not billions anymore, but enough to matter. The work with Carlos's advisory board, learning to listen instead of dictate, to support rather than save. The slow, difficult process of building relationship on foundation other than transactions. There'd been setbacks, a loan application rejected because banks preferred predatory development over ethical investment, a community meeting where residents challenged Rachel's authority to speak on affordable housing, questioning whether someone who'd profited from gentrification could truly advocate against it. But there'd been victories too. The first community land trust finalized 10 families securing ownership in homes they'd been renting for decades. Mrs. Chen's grocery reopening as a worker cooperative, shelves stocked with food the neighborhood actually ate. Jerome's first semester at MIT video, calls to Carlos full of excitement about courses and opportunities that had seemed impossible 2 years ago. And this sitting across from Carlos, while Sophia colored on the tablecloth, the easy comfort of people who'd learned each other's rhythms, who'd chosen each other daily for 12 months and planned to keep choosing. The server brought menus. Rachel and Carlos ordered, while Sophia requested the fancy cheese pasta, and sparkling water habits formed over monthly dinners at this table, tradition inherited from a mother she barely remembered but honored anyway. How's the Riverside transition going? Carlos cut into his appetizer, the kind of casual question that assumed interest in her work. Better than expected. The community land trust model is spreading. We've got inquiries from Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago. Turns out when you prioritize people over profit, word travels. Imagine that. His smile held warmth, teasing affection earned through months of proving her commitment wasn't performance. In Bridge Academy, Jerome's recruiting for us from MIT. Apparently having an engineering student from Brownsville makes other kids believe it's possible. We've got 12 applications for next fall already. Sophia looked up from her drawing. And I'm going to Bridge Academy when I'm in high school. Daddy promised. 4 years away, but yes. Carlos's hand rested on his daughter's head, that unconscious gesture of protection and love Rachel had watched him make hundreds of times. The meal continued through its familiar rhythms. Sophia's chatter about third grade, about her best friend Emma, who'd moved back to the neighborhood when rent stabilization allowed her family to return, about the science fair she wanted to enter with a project about renewable energy. Around them, the restaurant hummed with life that felt different from a year ago. The couple at the next table, she recognized them from community meetings, teachers who'd struggled with rent increases. The family near the window, 3 generations celebrating a grandmother's birthday, the kind of multi-generational stability gentrification usually destroyed. Midnight approached with the countdown tradition, restaurant staff distributing champagne flutes, sparkling cider for children, the real thing for adults who'd survived another year and earned the right to celebrate. 10, 9, so on. 8, Carlos reached across the table. Rachel took his hand, calloused and warm, proof of work that mattered in ways quarterly reports never had. 7, 6, Shama. Sophia climbed onto her chair, wanting to see everything, to miss nothing of this moment, where old years ended and new ones began. 4, 3, 2. Happy New Year. The words came from everywhere, staff diners, the general explosion of hope that maybe this year would be better, maybe this time things would work out. Carlos leaned across the table and kissed Rachel, brief and sweet, the kind of kiss that promised more than it delivered, but delivered enough to matter. Sophia squealed and covered her eyes, performing disgust while clearly delighted. When they pulled apart, Rachel found her eyes wet. Not sadness, something else, something she'd spent so long avoiding, she'd forgotten its name until Carlos and Sophia had taught her to recognize it again. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy at being exactly where she was with exactly who she was with, having exactly enough of what actually mattered. What are you thinking? Carlos's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the kind of small gesture that signified comfort. Familiarity, the accumulation of 1,000 tiny moments into something that looked like love. That I spent 20 years building the wrong kind of wealth. And I'm grateful I ran out of time before I ran out of chances to build something real. Sophia tugged on Rachel's sleeve. Look what I made. She held up her drawing, 4 figures now, not 3. Carlos on the left, tall and steady. Sophia in the middle gap in her smile, even though the gap was gone. Naomi floating on a cloud above them, yellow halo drawn in crayon. And beside Carlos, holding his hand, stood a woman with brown hair and a smile. That's you. You're part of our family now. The statement held the absolute certainty of children who'd decided something and expected the world to comply. Rachel looked at Carlos' question in her eyes. She's not wrong. He squeezed her hand. We're not married. We're not even living together yet. But you're part of this. Part of us. If you want to be. Rachel looked at the drawing, at Naomi's figure still present, still honored at the way Sophia had made room for Rachel, without erasing the mother who'd come before. At Carlos's expression, open and hopeful, offering partnership, instead of rescue, companionship, instead of transaction. I want to be. The restaurant began to empty, diners heading to after parties or home to sleep off champagne. Carlos settled the bill, not 15,000 this time, just the actual meal cost, reasonable and earned. They bundled Sophia into her coat, the girl already yawning, ready to sleep through the subway ride back to Brownsville. Outside, snow fell heavier, now the kind of weather that made New York feel magical instead of merely expensive. They walked toward the subway, Carlos carrying Sophia. When her legs got tired, Rachel walking beside them, and something shifted in her chest. For 20 years, she'd measured success in acquisitions and accolades and bank accounts and board seats and everything that could be quantified and competed for. She'd built an empire to prove she deserved to exist, to demonstrate worth to people whose opinions shouldn't have mattered. And here, walking through Brooklyn snow with a man who'd chosen community over prestige and a child who'd chosen to include her in crayon drawings, Rachel finally understood what she'd been missing. Success wasn't having everything. It was knowing what couldn't be bought: presence instead of presence, partnership instead of power. The specific warmth of a child's hand in yours because she trusted you to hold on. They descended into the subway, leaving 2025 behind and entering 2026 with its unknown challenges and uncertain promises. Rachel didn't know what the new year held, whether Carter Community Capital would succeed, whether the community land trust model would spread, whether she and Carlos would navigate the complications of building relationship on foundations other than rescue and salvation. But she knew she'd rather face those uncertainties with people who mattered than face certain success alone. The train arrived, doors sliding open. They found seats together, Sophia immediately curling against her father's shoulder. Already asleep, Carlos's free hand found Rachel's fingers lacing together in the casual intimacy of people who'd learned to choose each other daily. Thank you. Rachel looked at him, question implicit. For what? For showing up, not with money or solutions or grand gestures. Just showing up, being here. That's what matters. The train rattled through tunnels, carrying them toward Brownsville, toward the brownstone Rachel now called home, toward lives built on foundations more stable than quarterly returns. Rachel leaned against Carlos's shoulder. Sophia's breathing steady between them, and closed her eyes. She'd spent 2 decades proving she could have everything. Now finally she was learning the difference between having everything and having what mattered. The train emerged from underground Brooklyn, spreading before them in lights and snow, and the messy beauty of communities that survived despite everything trying to destroy them. Rachel watched the city flow past, feeling something settle in her chest, not the desperate ambition that had driven her for so long, but quieter certainty. This was enough. This was more than enough. This was everything that couldn't be bought, earned, or achieved, only received with open hands and grateful hearts. The train pulled into their stop. Carlos shifted carefully, trying not to wake Sophia. They emerged into the cold night, walking the 3 blocks home through snow that would be gone by morning but felt permanent in the moment. At the brownstone steps, Carlos paused. Come up, stay. We'll make hot chocolate, get Sophia into bed, and maybe talk about what this year might bring. Rachel nodded, following them inside into warmth and possibility, into a future she couldn't control or predict or purchase, only enter with hope and presence and the willingness to keep showing up. Behind them, the city glittered with the promises of another new year, another chance to get it right, another opportunity to choose what mattered over what was easy. Rachel climbed the stairs to Carlos's apartment, their apartment increasingly as her things migrated from brownstone to family, and felt the weight of 2 decades of wrong choices finally lifting. She'd lost an empire. She'd gained a life. And for the first time since leaving West Virginia, Rachel Carter knew exactly what success looked like.